Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a land just incredibly rich in minerals. Gold, platinum, diamonds, all buried deep down. Now, sort of hold that image against another one. Widespread poverty, really extreme inequality, millions struggling for basics. Clean water, decent schools.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast.
This is the paradox right at the heart of South Africa, and was what we're diving into today. How can a country sitting on such immense riches have so many people living in, frankly, such tough conditions?
It's a tension that the stack of sources we've looked at really brings to the front. We've gone through analyses, reporting, mining industry data, speeches from people like Julius Malema, manifestos from parties like MK and the EFF, historical documents, the Freedom Charter, for example, and of course recent government stats.
So a whole range of material grappling with this disconnect and exploring let's be honest, a very controversial idea proposed as a solution, nationalizing South Africa's mines. Our mission in this deep dive, using all that material, is to help you understand the arguments, the evidence presented, get the historical context, and really see what proponents are claiming nationalization could actually mean for the country and, well, for you.
Okay, so let's start right there with that paradox. Wealth beneath the ground, poverty above it.
Exactly.
The sources we checked absolutely confirm South Africa's incredible mineral wealth. I mean, we're talking the world's largest reserves of platinum group metals, manganese.
Wow.
Plus really significant deposits of gold, diamonds, chromium. It's huge.
And the history tied up in this is massive. Just that one area, the Witwatersrand Basin, the Golden Arc, they call it sometimes, the sources cited as producing something like, what, 40 to 50% of all the gold ever mined in the world?
That's the figure, yeah. It literally built cities like Johannesburg. Didn't just generate wealth, it physically shaped the place.
But then, like you said, you contrast that immense wealth, past and present, with the picture painted by the sources using official data. Millions living in, well, dire living conditions is the phrase used.
Yeah.
A big chunk in informal settlements, shacks, unemployment, staggeringly high, around 30%, even higher for young people.
And the inequality is just off the charts, among the world's worst.
And access to basics, clean water, schools, clinics, it's a daily fight for so many. It really feels like two different worlds in one place.
It does. And mining isn't just history, right? It's still a major economic driver. Exports, investment, the wealth is still being pulled out of the ground.
So the crucial question the sources really dig into is, okay, where is it going? Who's actually benefiting from all these resources today?
Right. And that's where the sources get quite specific. They describe the current ownership structure as being mainly foreign multinational corporations.
Okay.
And a pretty small local elite.
And the numbers they quote are really striking. One analysis points out that roughly 55%, over half of mining profits, flow directly out to foreign-based companies.
55%?
Yeah, and they name names. Anglo-American is mentioned as taking a massive slice, like 41% of the whole sector's profits from its SA operations.
41% just for Anglo-American.
That's what one source reported, yeah. And other big global players, Glencore, major U.S. asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, they're also named as key beneficiaries.
Now, what's really interesting, I think, is how the sources critique Black economic empowerment, BEE, specifically in mining.
Right. That policy meant to redress historical imbalances.
Exactly. Introduced post-apartheid to transfer ownership, management to Black South Africans.
Right.
But the sources we looked at, they argue pretty strongly that in mining, its implementation became, well, one source calls it legalized corruption for a few.
Meaning it didn't really spread the wealth widely among Black South Africans?
Yeah. That's the core critique, that it ended up creating sort of token ownership stakes, mainly for a small, politically connected group, businessmen, politicians.
I see.
Allowing the big mining houses to basically tick the boxes, keep control, and keep sending the majority of the profits offshore.
And this is where that very specific, very potent example comes in from the sources involving former President Cyril Ramaphosa. His 9% stake in the Laman mine is brought up, alongside documents presented in the sources suggesting he urged police action during the Marikana strike.
Yeah, that connection is drawn very sharply.
And it's used to illustrate this entanglement, right?
Yeah.
Between political figures, mine ownership, and how the state responds to workers. It feeds that argument about who really benefits.
Absolutely. And that leads us directly to Marikana itself, a really pivotal moment. August 2012, 34 striking mine workers shot, killed by police at Lonmin.
The sources describe Julius Malema's reaction going there shortly after. He's quoted pointing at the British ownership of the mine, saying something quite raw like, "It is not the British who were killed. It is our black brothers." And he directly criticized the president's actions at the time.
And crucially, this tragedy, it wasn't just politicians talking. The sources really stressed that the demand for change surged up from the ground, from the grieving families, the surviving miners.
Right.
Their call, as recorded and cited in the material, was crystal clear. The mine must be nationalized. We support Malema saying that the mines must be nationalized.
So that event, workers killed while fighting for a better share of the wealth dug from under their feet. It's presented as the absolute starkest example of that disconnect.
Exactly. And a key moment that really solidified this demand for a fundamental ownership shift.
It makes that miners' quote mentioned in the sources hit really hard.
Yeah.
The people who sit in offices make the money.
Yeah, it contrasts their dangerous work, long hours underground for what are called starvation wages, against the profits enjoyed elsewhere.
So that brings us to the core proposal explored in this deep dive, this vision of nationalization. What does it actually look like, according to the sources?
Well, the central argument presented is, take control of the mines. Turn their profits from private gain into a public resource. Use it explicitly to fund the country's needs, benefit all South Africans directly.
And what specifically could it fund? Malema's stated goal, the sources say, is nationalize, make sure workers get a living wage, and use peaceful yet radical and militant action, that's the phrase used, to target what's called white monopoly capital and get wealth back into the people's hands.
And the sources list quite a few concrete possibilities for where that nationalized mining money could go. For instance, the MK manifesto is cited promising free, quality education, preschool right through to postgraduate level.
No fees, no student debt, training engineers, doctors, artisans.
That's the idea presented. Also, building and fully funding public clinics, hospitals, cutting waiting times, major infrastructure development, roads, water pipes, power grids, especially in rural towns, often left behind.
Which would also create jobs, presumably. Hiring nurses, teachers.
Exactly. Thousands of public sector jobs. And the EFF manifesto, also mentioned, proposes setting up a sovereign wealth fund.
Like Norway's oil fund.
Sort of, yeah. Inspired by that model. Save or invest the mineral revenue long-term inside South Africa. Build new industries, upgrade hospitals, clinics, that kind of thing.
Okay, and here's one that feels very current. Potentially funding a universal basic income, a UBI.
Right. The sources note the ANC's pledge to turn the current COVID grant into a permanent, unconditional income for adults under 60.
And the argument is mining revenue could actually pay for that.
The proponents argue it could, yeah. Making South Africa potentially the first country aiming for a regular grant for all adults aged 1859. And Malema, after Marikana, is quoted promising to double social grants using nationalized funds.
Other ideas mentioned.
Funding a guaranteed price for farmers from a national pot, maybe even potentially wiping out government debt altogether.
So the fundamental shift proposed is taking this huge river of wealth. Instead of flowing to shareholders, many overseas on Wall Street, it flows into the state treasury, used for public good. For you, the citizen.
That's the core pitch. And it's clear these ideas aren't new. They have deep roots, and the sources make that connection very strongly.
Yeah, they bring up that powerful question, attributed to Malema, but echoing others like Thomas Sankara. Why must a few drink champagne while millions don't even have water?
It cuts right to the heart of the perceived injustice, doesn't it?
It does. And they quote Chris Hani, the anti-apartheid leader.
A revered figure.
Saying, socialism is not about big concepts. It is about water. Decent education.
Yeah.
As long as the economy is dominated by an unelected, privileged few, the case for socialism will exist.
And proponents today, drawing on Hani, link that directly to reclaiming the mines, arguing the minerals belong to everyone, not just shareholders or that unelected privileged few in boardrooms in London or Joburg.
They point back, way back, to the Freedom Charter of 1955.
Foundational document.
Which explicitly promised to nationalize the mines, banks, and monopoly industry so the people shall share in the country's wealth.
Right. And the argument presented in the sources is that now, over 65 years later, much of that wealth is still controlled by companies based in former colonial capitals or by local associates.
Framing it as a kind of neocolonialism, they cite Kwame Nkrumah, too.
Yes, drawing that parallel, reinforcing this idea that political freedom was won, but the economic struggle wasn't finished. And Marikana served as a brutal reminder of that.
So what's the sense from the sources about the current energy behind these ideas? Is it just history?
No, not at all. They describe a real sense of current momentum. These voices are rising.
Okay, so they mentioned the demands for Marikana families and miners are still there.
Definitely. And political parties on the left in parliament are actively pushing nationalization. Even within parts of the ruling ANC, you hear discussions about related ideas like that sovereign wealth fund.
So there's a broader feeling, described in the sources, that the country's problems persist largely because wealth gets siphoned off by the privileged few.
That understanding seems widespread, yes, from grassroots activists to wider commentary. It's presented as a core reason why things haven't fundamentally changed for many.
And the material kind of builds towards presenting this as a stark choice, doesn't it? A radical choice, they call it.
Yeah. Continue the current path, or, as the proponents argue, seize the country's destiny, nationalize the mines for dignity, for development.
They end that thread by really hammering home the claim. The case for sharing South Africa's own wealth is strong. These minerals, our gold, our platinum, our diamonds, should finally work for the people who built the wealth.
That's the concluding argument presented on that front.
Okay, so let's pull this together. From this deep dive, looking just at the sources you shared, we've really explored this profound tension, haven't we? South Africa's incredible mineral wealth sitting alongside deep, persistent poverty and inequality.
That's the central paradox. And we've dug into the major proposal found in those sources, nationalizing the mines. The idea being to redirect those huge profits from private companies to the state.
Right.
Potentially funding massive public projects, universal education, healthcare infrastructure, maybe even basic income grants.
So, given everything presented in these sources, the sheer scale of the wealth we're talking about, the depth of the poverty still experienced, the historical demands for change, those recent tragedies fueling new calls. Here's the thought we want to leave you, the listener, with.
Yeah.
Just based on this material. What does the future control and ownership of South Africa's mineral resources, its gold, its platinum, its diamonds, truly mean for the country's path forward and ultimately for the lives of its people?